Well, are we really done with the war in Afghanistan? A lot of people are celebrating. I'm seeing some people in indie media saying things like Joe Biden is so courageous. And oh, he did the one brave thing that no other president was willing to do, which was pull troops and end the war in Afghanistan. But are we really done? I am going to say no. The war in Afghanistan is not really over. And let me explain. So we're already kind of seeing the beginnings of the seeds being sowed that the war in Afghanistan is not really over. We're already hearing reports of ISIS-K and Al-Qaeda, and they're all around, and oh no. And a lot of me really wonders if this botched evacuation, this botched withdrawal with how it was done, was actually done on purpose. I know this is getting a little bit conspiratorial, but follow me for a minute. A lot of questions that we should be asking. Was it done on purpose in order to ensure the war never really ends? That is a real big question we should be thinking about. So what I mean by this is we know that the Warhawks in Washington don't like to end war. They like to continue greasing the pockets of the war machine, the military-industrial complex, who brings in $1 trillion or more annually from military and war in this country. So we know that they don't like shutting it down. They like to either pivot it or they like to continue it, but they don't like to end it. In fact, they like to expand it. So we know this. Now, we also saw with Trump, who really did, as a person who was not political, comes into office, he really wanted to get us out of all of these wars. He's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Pull the troops. Why are we there? Let's get out. We have enough oil of our own. We don't need theirs. Let's end this. But when he got in there, he was really up against the powers that be, right? There were all of these actors that were surrounding him. They were trying to sabotage his every attempt at withdrawing troops from the Middle East. And he was never really able to get it done. He was able to he was able to draw the troops down to about 2,500 in Iraq, 2,500 in Afghanistan or so, and a few hundred troops in Syria to guard the oil, right? So he was never really fully able to withdraw the troops. But what makes us think Joe Biden, who, unfortunately and sadly for Joe Biden, is clearly mentally on the decline, what makes us think Joe Biden, this kind of feeble man, is suddenly able to stand up to the war machine like he's the guy with the spine and he's going to take them on? Not so likely, especially when you look at the people he's put in his cabinet surrounding him. So he's got a lot of these West Exec Warhawks. So West Exec Advisors was started by Tony Blinken and Michelle Flournoy, and she was up for Department of Defense, the head of Department of Defense secretary, but she ended up being passed over, and it was Floyd Austin, or Austin Floyd. I always get his name backwards. But he ended up getting that bid instead. And what we saw was that West Exec Advisor, so now Michelle and Tony were both underneath, they were like, the undersecretary. So Tony was the undersecretary of state and Michelle was the undersecretary of defense. So they were just, number two in line in the Obama administration. They left the Obama administration. They started their own advisory firm. It's not considered a lobbyist organization, so they don't have to disclose their clients. And what they did was they started advising mostly big tech companies on how to get defense contracts, really lucrative defense contracts. So we don't, like I said, we don't know who they helped do this, but we do know some of their clients, which includes like Facebook, right, and Microsoft. And Google. We know that they were helping these big tech companies secure these big contracts. And they have stated in numerous different speeches that they've done or events that they've done, conversations, those kind of sit downs with Michelle Flournoy or sit downs with Tony Blinken. And over the years, they have discussed how war would change and that we would see, rather than the traditional boots on the ground, invade, take over. And we see that war has shifted through the generations. It's always shifting and changing and modifying and just becoming more advanced. And so they would talk about how the new advancement, the new war, would be more of a technological warfare, that we would see more drones, that we would see fewer soldiers on the ground, but instead we would see high-tech equipment, high-tech surveillance, high-tech weapons that would be likely formed and developed by these big tech companies that they helped usher into the Defense Department, the new military-industrial complex, I call it. So you have the old school people that make the planes and they make the bombs, but then you've got the new school weapons, and those are the tech guys, the guys that are going to send in drones and other sorts of high-tech weaponry. So they talked about that a lot. Well, then you've got Biden, who, when he's creating his cabinet, he doesn't bring in a bunch of peacemakers who want to see peace in the Middle East. That's not who he surrounded himself with. So this is clue one that the war is not really over. Biden surrounded himself with Warhawks. He installed into his cabinet a bunch of people from West Exec advisors who have been openly discussing changing the face of war from boots on the ground to high-tech warfare. That's clue number one. Clue number two is that Tony Blinken has even stated recently that he doesn't see us keeping our eyes off of Afghanistan, but instead we would maintain due diligence to ensure that they can no longer become a hotbed for terrorism. He was asked about this with the withdrawal of the troops from Afghanistan. How can we ensure that Afghanistan isn't going to be a launching pad for extremist groups? And he said, we're still going to be doing what we call over the horizon, is what they're calling it. So they're using satellites maybe to spy on you. They're spying using various different high-tech technology. Over the horizon and counterterrorism, which would include drones, other high-tech warfare, and special ops on occasions that special ops is needed. So you can withdraw troops, you can shut down bases, and you could still keep an eye on a country. You can find out what they're doing, and if necessary, you can bomb them. So with Tony Blinken saying that, and now we're seeing clue number three, all of the media reports of ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, oh no, they're there and they're making it difficult for Americans to get out of Afghanistan. We're already seeing those seeds sowed of this area is in fact going to be a place that is going to be a hotbed for terrorism. And then clue number, what number am I on here? Am I on 4 or am I on 5? The last clue is the way the withdrawal happened. So who talked good old Joe into leaving behind all of our high-tech military equipment? Who talked him into that? Who said, okay, you know what, when we withdraw, just go ahead and abandon the place like thieves in the night. Just get up and go. And according to some of the sources on the ground in Afghanistan, was the Afghan forces weren't even told that the U.S. was going to abandon in the middle of the night and finally be totally gone. They weren't given any warning, that they just felt totally abandoned, that, yeah, they knew the day was coming, but they thought these guys would say goodbye, at least throw like a going away party or something, but that didn't seem to happen. As we know, because a lot of Americans are now stranded in Afghanistan trying to get out, no one seemed to be given a warning that the day was coming way sooner than Joe Biden even announced. He'd already pushed the date back, right? So he'd already said, we're pushing it from May to September 11th. Well, that's a couple of weeks away. They certainly had time. They had 3 weeks from the time they actually withdrew to the deadline. So they didn't need to, and that's an arbitrary. He could have pushed it even further if he really wanted to. And he said, look, we need 1 more month to get all of our Americans out, to get the high-risk Afghans out, and to withdraw all of our equipment properly. That could have been done. I mean, look, if he was going to push the date back from May even until September, many of us thought that was in order to do that, saying, well, look, it's a little hasty to get out in May. We can't do it effectively and cleanly. And so what we need to do is we need to push back until September so that we have time to get Americans out, time to process Afghans' visas and paperwork to get out, and time to get our equipment out. That's what all of us were thinking. But suddenly that wasn't the thing that happened. Suddenly they abandoned ship and nobody really knew about it. And a lot of stuff was left behind. And within a weekend, the Taliban took over Afghanistan. It was almost too unreal to be believed how this all happened. And quite frankly, I'm not believing it. I'm not believing it. So now you have this scenario going on where it is ripe for problems. Right? I mean, luckily the Taliban are playing ball and they're saying, okay, anybody with an American passport can get out of the country. They're being somewhat flexible with the Afghans who want to get out. They're saying if you have proper papers, then that are processed fully by the United States, and you can get out. But there's a lot of Afghans who don't. They have just preliminary papers, or their paperwork was destroyed when the embassy started shredding stuff. So there's a lot of these people that are in limbo that are kind of waiting outside the airport hoping to get in, and the Taliban is, it's like hit or miss whether or not the Taliban is going to let them through. But with these reports of, well, now, maybe the Taliban's being nice, thank goodness, right? That could have gone totally awry. This is why you don't wait for your enemy to take over the zone before you evacuate. You evacuate, and evacuations are always chaotic because you're rushing to get the evacuations done before the enemy takes the stronghold of your zone. That's why they're rushed. That's why they're chaotic. That's what happened in Saigon. It was a rushed, chaotic evacuation to get 130,000 people out of Saigon because the enemy was coming, but they weren't there yet. That's why it was rushed and chaotic. So just to make that point really clear. Biden's chaotic and rushed evacuation happened after the Taliban took Kabul. And now it was like, oh, crap, what are we going to do? We only have the airport. That's the last stronghold we've got because we came back for it. So, so now we're seeing the rise of ISIS-K and Al-Qaeda because Taliban was being nice. So now they have to say, well, no, but it's these other terrorist groups and they're not going to play as nice. And they're now advancing toward the airport. They're now making it difficult for Americans to get out of the country. So you see how all of this seems to have paved the way for a future where we use Afghanistan as target practice for our drones. And for these over-the-horizon counterterrorism, that we're able to use them as the guinea pig for all of these ideas that Tony Blinken and Michelle Flournoy have helped these big tech companies come up with that are trying to get these defense contracts or already have them. The best way to test is on a place where the Taliban is taken over. You can't really pull that off in Iran. You can't go bomb Iran. You can't use them for target practice without some serious ramifications. But you can certainly do that to the Taliban in Afghanistan, right? You can't do that in Iraq. The Iraqi government is aware. They want the U.S. out. They don't want us there anymore. They don't want to be the pawn in between the United States and Israel and Iran. They want us out of there. Syria, we certainly have been attempting to use, and I'm sure we are using and testing a lot of these counterterrorism over the horizon tactics. But believe me, I'm sure it's going to happen in Afghanistan as well. So I guess it depends on what you think the definition of the war being over is in your mind. In my mind, the war being over means the war is really over. It looks like Vietnam. You get out and you don't meddle anymore. You just, you get out, you take your people, you take your stuff, and you leave it alone. Now, even with Vietnam, our administration put, we weren't trading with them. We hindered their economic prosperity for a while from 1975 until in the 90s when Bill Clinton finally restored relations. So we're looking at 15 to 20 years of economic sanctions and damage done to Vietnam. And that's bad, and I don't think we should be doing that to any country, but except extremely limited circumstances. Like when you're really, the scope is, for me, real narrow. But we at least stopped bombing Vietnam, right? We at least stopped, we didn't do any counterterrorism or over the horizon on them. So that to me is the definition of fully getting out of the war in Afghanistan is getting out, recognizing, just like with the new government, the North taking over the South in Vietnam, the new government became the legitimate government of Vietnam. Taliban are going to be the legitimate government of Afghanistan. It would require us recognizing them as a legitimate government and staying out and not doing these counterterrorism or over-the-horizon special ops operations against the country. I don't see that happening, so I don't consider the war over. I just think we pulled troops. So there's nothing to applaud yet. The people are still going to suffer. The people are still going to be living in a war zone. And of course, the United States, on top of that, is not going to allow them economic prosperity. We're already starting to put blocks on the Taliban's money, their funds for the country. We're not allowing them to have access to their own money. And we're going to do that, and we're probably not going to recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government, making it even harder for the Afghan people to rebuild after war. That, to me, is not ending the war. But certainly, if we're bombing them, if we're doing these counterterrorism and over-the-horizon operations that does include bombing another sovereign nation, that means the war isn't over. That is my prediction. We'll see how it pans out. I'm, of course, hoping to be wrong on this. I'm hoping that good old Joe in his old age just feels soft, and he forgets his warmongering past. And he instead says, yeah, we have got to shake their hands. It's the Taliban. They won. And we're going to have to respect their sovereign borders and not do anything to, no bombing, no nothing. It is what it is. We'll see. We'll see. I can hope. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to join my Locals community where I give you a behind-the-scenes look at what's going on here. I also post some personal stuff. You kind of get a glimpse into my life. And also just more in-depth conversations. I do 2 live streams a week on Locals that are more casual, so be sure to check it out. That link is down below. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, email me, kim@KimIverson.com. If you'd like to see more of my content, especially the uncensored kind, sign up for my Locals community. Locals is where we can freely discuss topics that are often censored or limited by big tech. Not only will you get bonus segments not seen on YouTube, but you'll also gain access to my casual behind-the-scenes live streams, informative postings stacked with valuable information, and even just random fun pics and videos from my personal life. It's a way to support my show while getting more content. It's $5 a month for premium access and free for others. So go to my Locals page at kimiverson.locals.com.